Well, good morning, and welcome to the study of St. John Lutheran Church here in Sanborn, Iowa. I'm Pastor Nick Sinatra, and so glad you could join us here this morning, whether you're live or watching this back later. It's that time of the week where we take a peek ahead at Sunday morning and share a couple announcements of what's going on here at St. John and Sanborn. So it's a lovely day here in Iowa today. It's nice and sunny, as you can see. It's a good day the Lord has made, I'd say. So, well, so decided to do a little something different, maybe a little challenging for our study today. And this, of course, is a preview for the sermon that's preached here on Sunday in person. We're not quite live streaming service just yet, but we're hoping to get to be that way. So stay tuned, and you might even start seeing Sunday morning services here. But anyways, I've decided for this Sunday that we're going to go back into the Old Testament lesson appointed for this Sunday. So the last few Sundays we have done, I believe, the gospel lesson, and I think the first Sunday I was here was Galatians, the epistle lesson. But first time for an Old Testament lesson here, and I'm looking forward to it. So a little bit of context before I start reading that passage is last week's Old Testament lesson. Abraham is sitting in his tent and he receives three visitors. Angelic visitors, only angel does mean visitor or messenger, really, in the Greek and the Hebrew as well. It's angelos in Greek. Malak, I think. Not to be confused with Melech, which is king, but means messenger in the original languages. So he gets three divine messengers who come, and Abraham shows them a little hospitality, gives them some bread to eat, some water, curds, milk, good stuff, And they tell him, "Oh, your wife, your elderly wife, she's, never had any children. She's gonna have a son by this time next year." And Sarah laughs like, "No way, no way, I'm gonna have a son." And they're like, "Yeah, you will, and we heard you laugh." So that's the context from last week. That was the beginning of Genesis chapter 18. So this week, we are also in Genesis chapter 18, but we are picking up where we left off. And I would say the tone kind of shifts, but more on that in a second. Let's go ahead and dive right in. A reading from Genesis chapter 18, beginning at verse 16. Then the men set out from there, and they looked down towards Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. And the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know." So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, "Will you indeed sweep the righteous with the wicked? Suppose that there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" And the Lord said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Abraham answered and said, "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. But suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." Again he spoke to him and said, "Suppose 40 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 40, I will not do it." Then he said, "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. He said, Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. And he answered, For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he answered, For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So in the very next chapter comes the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Fire and brimstone, as you've perhaps heard the phrase. I think that's straight from the King James. I think modern days they will translate that as like sulfur and fire. Rain down from heaven, annihilate the cities. We all get the image. And of course, you hear the phrase fire and brimstone, and you think of a fiery preacher who's, hammering down the law and all that sort of stuff. And this fire and brimstone is probably on Abraham's mind. Abraham knew what was going on in Sodom. I mean, who didn't at this rate? I mean, if there was an outcry, I'm pretty sure this is, like word on the street that Sodom and Gomorrah are way out of line. And for further context, it's not just Sodom and Gomorrah. It was actually 5 cities in total. And if I recall correctly, that would be Sodom, Gomorrah, Zeboim, Admah, and Zoar. I believe that's who they are. There were 5 cities in total. Of those 5 cities, only 4 ultimately get destroyed in chapter 19. God spares Zoar for another purpose. Maybe we'll pick that thread up later, but anyways, case in point, destruction is coming, and this brings up a rather difficult subject that you find, particularly in the Old Testament, I think more than the New, but it's not foreign in the New Testament either. It's the whole idea of divine judgment, the wrath of God coming down and rendering judgment. And this brings up a lot of difficult questions, difficult thoughts. And so I figured, well, let's preach on it, let's study it, and maybe we can make a little more sense of it. See, is God really just in what he is doing here, or what constitutes divine judgment? And I found in reading and studying this that I think there's a fine difference between divine judgment and temporal calamity, trouble, that sort of thing. So, for example, 20 years ago, hard to believe it was 20 years ago, 2005, Hurricane Katrina strikes New Orleans. And there was some popular preacher out there saying that this was the wrath of God coming down on sinful New Orleans, and that's not true, quite frankly. That's not true at all. Yeah, New Orleans has got its reputation for vice, but so does Las Vegas, and so do so many other urban centers or other locales around the world. No, New Orleans having Hurricane Katrina strike and be so devastating is simply a consequence of a fallen world. No different than a massive, F5 tornado coming through here, the upper Midwest where I am right now. Natural disasters are the result of the fallen world. It is because Adam and Eve disobeyed and sin entered the world. This is a reminder that, we need to be saved from our sin. I think they do cause a chance to repent, and they're temporal. You can rebuild after a hurricane, and I know while New Orleans, it's been a slow rebuilding, and in some ways they haven't quite rebuilt after that. It's still a lot better than what it was in the immediate aftermath of the hurricane. I remember I was still alive at that time. So that's not the same thing. Temporal punishment affects both the righteous and the unrighteous. If a tornado were to come through northwestern Iowa, you know, it could easily take out the church and the parsonage, as well as the you know the atheist house who maybe lives just down the road. All the same. The sun shines on the good and the wicked, all the same. So does the rain. It comes down on both good and wicked, all the same. So this punishment of Sodom and Gomorrah is not the same thing. That is divine judgment. It is something, I guess, more rare, more unique. And the reason that this divine punishment comes down is for blatant unrepentance. Pretty much all the city, less than 10 people, I think is what it comes down to, were not repentant in all of Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, that's a lot of people, and very few who are what we might consider righteous. And so that's why it comes down. And this isn't the first instance of this happening in the Bible. Of course, you have the flood that happened first. The whole world, again, was unrepentant, and thus God brings down a flood that wipes out the whole face of the earth. And this would be fresh on Abraham's mind. I mean, after all, his forebearers are the ones who got off the ark. I mean, so with the rest of the world. The flood is still very much on his mind as, a form of divine judgment. And so, again, now God's looking to use it again. Abraham, he's a little concerned, for the righteous people who are in the city, but even the unrighteous as well. I think Abraham at this rate also realizes just how much God has done for him. I mean, at this rate, Abraham has lied to two different kings that his wife Sarah was really his sister. He lied to save his life, even though God promised that he would spare his life. Abraham had an illegitimate son with his wife's maidservant, despite God promising an heir by Sarah's womb. He got impatient. He faltered a little bit. And yet, God still called him. God still held him as righteous, and I think ultimately Abraham did believe. I think Abraham understands that, I am but dust and ashes, and yet God has been merciful to him. And so Abraham, is wondering, why won't God be merciful to these people, or, at least be merciful to the righteous people who live there? And I think that's a common sentiment we can all relate to. And I don't know if Abraham got all the answers immediately after this aftermath either. I'm a Lutheran. I'll go ahead and I'll read what Luther kind of concludes about Abraham in this passage here. He says, "I believe that Abraham went home full of sorrow and spent that night without sleep and in tears and sighs because of the destruction of so great a multitude. But while godly Abraham is so concerned about the people of Sodom, they live in luxury and do violence to their guest, altogether unconcerned about their own destruction. This is the picture of the world and of the church, as Christ too says in John 16, 'You will lament, but they will rejoice.'" End quote. And into that chapter in Luther's commentary. And so, yeah, Abraham is, I'm sure, full of sorrow, as I'm sure many believers are, knowing they perhaps have unbelieving friends and relatives and what have you. They know people this way, and they want them to turn back. And so, why do we include, I guess, this sort of thing, instances of divine punishment? Well, I think it's, for one, to show us, just how much we need salvation, and so that perhaps we don't fall into the same mistake. And also to show that for now there is still time. In this day and age, with everything that's gone on, and and whatnot, there's still time. The end has not come just yet. There's still a little time to repent. And I think that's what these stories are. You know, I don't think God's just, all destructive. He doesn't make this choice lightly, you know. And Abraham interceding, I think, is a perfect example of Christian behavior, and specifically of a mirror of what Christ does on the cross. Christ says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And while a lot of people then and now scoff at that statement, while a lot of people, I'm sure the Sodomites, would have scoffed at Abraham interceding with God for them, how many people were saved by Christ's words, saying, "Father, forgive"? How many have been saved and yet will be saved because of the words of Christ there? And also in these divine punishments, as you were, while God may not spare the place because of so great an unrepentance, he still spares the righteous. Look at Noah and his family, 8 souls in all, as we like to say in our baptismal rite. God spared them through the flood. Yeah, they had to witness, the water and the shadow of rain clouds come down and wipe out the earth, but he preserved them. And through them, the world was made new. In the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his 2 daughters are given refuge. They are allowed to escape, and God spares one of the cities, Zoar, as a place of refuge for them. So even though they were small remnants of people who were righteous, and maybe they did witness the awe-inspiring, destruction, God still spares them. And God still spares us too. Us who believe, us who, look to the cross of Jesus for our salvation. Us who have been made righteous by God. And so in this rather heavy text, I think there's still elements of gospel, and that's what we preach here at St. John in Sanborn, Iowa. So if you're in the neighborhood, go ahead and drop on by. Whether you're here on Sunday morning passing through for vacation to the Black Hills, we're just along, we're pretty close to Highway 18 here in Iowa, or I believe that's US 18 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so if you're on your way out to the Black Hills of South Dakota for vacation, or, passing the other way to go towards eastern Iowa, feel free to drop in if it's Sunday morning. Or if you're just looking for a church home, we're about an hour away from the Iowa Great Lakes, Okoboji, that whole area, maybe about an hour from Spencer. So if you're just looking for a church home or just passing through, we'd love to have you drop on by. Also, if you happen to be in the area this weekend in Sanborn, it is our annual Railroad Days. This weekend, I believe, starting Thursday night into the weekend. So on Saturday, St. John will have a little pop-up tent in Miller Park, which is just west of the church by a block or 2. We'll have a little tent up there. I think we got coloring sheets for the children, and I'll be standing around my clerical, so you can probably come talk to me if you're nearby or local and around this weekend. I'll be happy to just socialize and chat and maybe get to know a few of you in person if you're around. So that's what we got going on here. In terms of other events going on here at St. John Sanborn, looking to start Sunday school probably next month in August, if not following Labor Day. So more announcements on that will be forthcoming as we come along. But I'm hoping that not only will we have Sunday morning Bible study after service, but we'll maybe have men's Bible study, ladies' Bible study. I know we have a ladies' aid group that meets here, so maybe we'll have a little time for Bible study in that occasion as well. So a lot of good things happening here at St. John and Sanborn. We're blessed by God, for sunshine and rain and, the fruits of the earth. I mean, if you look really far back, there's a cornfield. So, even in all this gloom of the world and these other hard subjects, God is good. And we're blessed. And we're happy to share these blessings that we have here at St. John with you. So, I think that's all. I mean, wow, this is one of the longer ones I think I've run, but still. With that, every blessing in Christ.